So much has changed economically for millennials and Gen Z compared to their Gen X and boomer predecessors. Should retirement planning still be approached in the same way? Or should the work in whatever capacity you can get for 30 years so you can save enough to never work again strategy be amended? What if there's a better way? For as long as retirement has been a thing, it's required a ridiculous amount of financial forethought, logistics, and frankly, hope. It is the definition of the long game because it's almost impossible to put it off until the last minute. But the retirement landscape has changed significantly over the last century, and retirement as a concept is actually fairly new. For most of human history, people just worked until they died. Fun. The origins of retirement are traced back to Otto von Bismarck in the 1800s when he suggested government-run financial support for older members of society. Social Security was passed in America fewer than 100 years ago in 1935, and then corporations decided they would also help foot the bill. And pension plans, also known as defined benefit plans, came into vogue. But 1978 legislation introduced a new way to save in Section 401k of the tax code that quietly shifted the burden from the employer to the employee. And this new legislation, creating a defined contribution plan, paved the way for the pensions, which were expensive for employers to maintain, to slowly fall out of favor, especially as people began living longer. So it's kind of no surprise that today's American workers are under-saving, since funding your own retirement, now mostly without a pension, is a relatively new hurdle. The risk shift from institutions responsible for funding retirement to individuals being responsible for funding their retirements via 401ks and IRAs has placed the onus almost squarely on the shoulders of workers to figure this thing out, buffered by the average Social Security check worth, checks notes, $1,550 per month. That has big implications for young people today because it highlights something crucial. Retirement is an evolving concept. Almost necessarily, it looks different for every generation. So millennials and Gen Z have to play this long game differently than those who came before us, not just in how we plan financially, but also in how we structure our lives. Here's the good news, though. That means we are given the opportunity to define for ourselves what type of life we want to build more broadly. So, knowing it's the long game, how do you build a life you don't need a break from? Rather than bisecting your life into two halves, your working half and your retired half, like a budget production of the Apple TV Plus hit Severance, and going ham at each, mixing the two together can make the result even more enjoyable and fulfilling overall than saving all of your R&R for the back half of your life. It makes sense to devote some time, energy, and effort to constructing a lifestyle for yourself that you are not itching to escape from every chance you get, or counting down the years until retirement and probably making a lot of sacrifices in order to speed up that process. In fact, that may mean more midday breaks to watch TV or take bike rides or nap on a Wednesday afternoon. The paradox is, if you can build a life you don't need a break from, then planning for retirement will unfold more organically and take the pressure off. But here's the rub. It might take a little bit of effort and time to get to a place where your life, your routines, your workflows, your savings cushion can be molded into a form that fits your ideal schedule. You may have young children right now who dictate your day. You may work in a time-sucking job. You may be too low on the corporate food chain to call these types of shots for yourself, especially if your work is location dependent or closely tied to another person's schedule. You may be juggling all three of these things simultaneously, but it's helpful and productive even to dream about what an ideal week in the life would look like. It's about creating routines and working styles that generate the most positive outcomes for you. It might not be worthwhile to grind it out in a job you hate for 30 years solely for the money before you allow yourself to explore something you're actually interested in that may not pay as well. An ideal second act may be less about having unlimited free time to lounge around and more about having meaningful activities to fill your time. And for most people, that will include work and hobbies you find invigorating. So here are a few prompts that I like to ask to help conceptualize what this would look like for you. Number 1, in what ways do I deplete myself or run myself into the ground? Number 2, What does a life of meaning mean to me? Number 3, if I were only allowed to work for 2 hours per week, what parts of my job would I want to keep? And what would I want to ditch? I'm using an absurdly low amount of time just to force focus here, so only the best stuff can stay. Number 4, which rituals or practices make me feel most like myself, and what's stopping me right now from doing more of them? So now that we've got some of our conceptual boxes checked, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the financial side of this picture. Calculating your retirement needs based on your age. We can leverage some #math to understand how much we need to save, whether your retirement income is going to support a traditional retirement at traditional retirement age, 65 plus, or it's going to be your supplemental income starting in your 40s if you begin working part-time on a passion project. The generally agreed upon replacement rate for income in retirement is about 75% in the financial planning world, and replacement rate basically just means in order for you to replace your income, how much does your portfolio need to be able to pay you? This advice is given under the assumption that you'll pay less in taxes as a retiree, you'll stop saving, and you'll benefit from other cost cuts. But the problem in my mind is that almost nobody makes the same amount of money throughout their entire career, and wild swings in income can make identifying one pre-retirement income pretty difficult. Here's why this matters though. 56% of people say that they expect to have less than $500,000 by the time they retire, providing an annual income of $20,000 per year, according to the 4% rule. So supplement that with the average Social Security check, and that's about $3,200 per month to live on. Depending on your needs and your timing, that might be enough, but it might not be, as the same study found that only 3% of retirees deemed they were living the dream, while around 37% said they were comfortable. But I want all of Rich Girl Nation to live the dream, so let's unpack the math that can show us how to get there. First, we need to identify our general goal, bearing in mind that this is a ballpark, and to state the obvious, the earlier you start, the easier this will be. There's really no getting around that. So, what grand number in the bank should we shoot for? I recommend using your monthly spending plus buffer as a guidepost for how much to invest, as opposed to the aforementioned 75% income replacement rate. The challenging part about focusing on your monthly spending is that it too fluctuates through different life stages, and it'll be impacted by factors like where you live and how many dependents you have and your medical needs. But a monthly spending range is usually useful enough to provide a ballpark. For example, I know that when I was single, I lived on about $3,000 per month. Then when I got married, my half of our monthly spending jumped up to about $4,000 per month. When we have kids, it might go up to $6,000 for my half for consistency's sake. So this means our dual income needs to range anywhere from $6,000 to $12,000 per month. And if I can multiply by 12, I can get our annual spending, somewhere between $72K and $144K per year, depending on the stage of life in today's dollars. And if I multiply those numbers by 25, I get our portfolio targets that'll allow for a safe withdrawal rate of roughly 4%. That means my ballpark goal is anywhere between $1.8 and $3.6 million. So I can take the upper bound, the 3.6, and know that it would likely suffice as my sole source of income in retirement if my ideal life involved no work at all, or work of some kind that wasn't paid, like caring for family. This would be the number necessary for a traditional retirement. I can take the lower bound of 1.8 million and know that it would likely suffice as a less traditional retirement buffer for my costs, providing the majority of my monthly expenses if enjoyable part-time work could provide the rest. This would be the number more appropriate for the evolved retirement blended with your working life model that we're discussing today. And lest you think, but Katie, I do not dream of labor of any kind. Why would you suggest that we sandbag the OG retirement vision with something as silly as part-time work? Consider this. In a recent study from American Advisors Group, they found roughly half of the 1,500 people aged 60 to 75 surveyed said they plan to work part-time in retirement. 12% said they never plan to stop working, which is actually an increase from 6% in 2019. So this is already reality for many retirees, but it's hard to say whether it's by choice or out of necessity. But work sure feels different when you are choosing it, which makes saving and investing for the future a good idea no matter what your plans are. And by making intentional shifts toward fulfilling work earlier, you are less likely to hit traditional retirement age and feel disappointed if you slogged it out for 30 years doing something you didn't even like and still don't have enough to live a comfortable retirement. And with regards to those example ranges, the good news is that this is all proportional. For example, if you spend $4,000 per month, your goal number would be around $1.2 million, which is still a lot, but surprisingly achievable with consistent effort and compounding. So let's figure out how close you already are to your long-term goal. The concept of compounding can help us understand how close we already are to reaching our goal amount. And for the sake of simplicity, we'll use a lower average rate of return that takes inflation into account. For example, maybe you're 30 years old today, you've got $100K invested. By the time you're 50, that $100K will be worth $320,000, assuming a 6% real rate of return, even if you didn't invest anything else. To reiterate, I like to use 6% as a post-inflation rate of return because it helps accurately represent what the money will actually be worth in today's terms. Simply plug your existing invested assets into a compound interest calculator. We'll link a good one in the description. Use a 6% rate of return and then plug in a realistic number of years between now and when you expect to make this type of transition. If you want to be more conservative, so think higher inflation, lower nominal returns, you can use 5 or even 4%. You'll see that depending on how much you have already, you may be closer than you think. Some of you may realize you are already in a position where you can safely downshift and make life adjustments without meaningfully threatening your future security. To put a finer point on this, you may already have enough saved and invested for future use needs that any stress you're currently experiencing about sticking around in a highly paid field that just is not right for you might be unfounded. Because we don't know what the individually funded and personally responsible retirement is going to look like for our generation. It's worth interrogating whether or not the traditional model for retirement still makes sense for us. Instead, you can determine what a life you don't need a break from looks like and set your financial goals accordingly with a range based on your spending. Depending on your age and how much you already have saved and invested, you may be way closer to safety than you think. And if you want to hear the full episode of this week's Money with Katie show, click the video that just popped up on the screen and in the description of this video. Our show is a production of Morning Brew and is produced by Henna Velez and me, Katie Gatti-Tassan. Devin Emery is our chief content officer. Our video editors are Christy Muldoon, Sebastian Vega, and Nicole Friedman. Additional fact-checking comes from Kate Brandt.